Okay, we're holding now in the Kudasichas Chelech of Beis. It's page 70, Tazriya Metzera, the Ois Talid, sorry. So just to recap, the Rebbe asked that in most years, if it's not a leap year, so Tazriya Metzera is combined. And obviously the connection between Tazriya Metzera is that Tazriya speaks about Nigei Adam, Nigei Begodim, Metzera speaks about the blemishes of a house, but also Metzera is like a conclusion of what happened in Tazriya. The person got the Nigoim, and Metzera is Teras HaMetzera B'yem Taharasai, that it's when he gets purified. So the Rebbe says is that we have to understand the intrinsic connections, the deeper connections between Tazriya and Metzera, and we don't call it Parshas Isha. So the question is, if first of all, Tazriya means you're giving life, a child, giving birth to a child, which the Cha'ira is behepich. It conveys the opposite theme of the Parsha, because the Parsha speaks about Negoim. And right, and then he says also when again Metzera doesn't speak about the actual Metzera, it speaks about B'yem Tarasa, he gets purified. Okay, that's basically Aleph, and then Beis we said that to understand this we first have to be makdim. What Rambam says that it's part of the fundamental principles that Hashem grants reward and punishment. Reward to somebody who does the Torah mitzvahs, and punishment to the ones who do not follow instructions. And the Rebbe said that really Torah is Torah's chesed. Torah is kindness. So when there's a punishment, it's not just a punishment per se, but rather it's for a purpose. It's to purify and cleanse the person. We don't see that so much b'galei, but we see that dafka by Nigat Saras, like he's going to explain in the Rambam, that it's very clear that the punishment brings to a reward. Now the Rambam says that, this is the Rambam we quoted in Tumas Tzaras. The Rambam says that the change that affects the clothes in the house, which the Torah refers to Tzaras, it's not a natural occurrence, but rather it's a sign that existed amongst the Jewish people to warn them against Lashon Hara. So when a person speaks Lashon Hara, the walls of the house change color. If he does tshuva, the house will be purified. If, however, he persists in his wickedness until the house is destroyed, so then the leather implements in his house change color. If he persists in his wickedness until the Torah requires that it be burnt, the clothes he wears change colors. If he does tshuva, then he will be purified. If he persists in his wickedness until the Torah requires that it be burnt, the skin undergoes changes and develops tzaras. This causes him to basically be isolated, and for it to be made known that he must remain alone, so that he will not be involved in the talks of Lashon Hara. So what do we see from the Rambam? That the Rambam says that Hashem brings a change in the natural order to warn the Jewish people against Lashon Hara. So the order that Hashem first brings is the change to the walls of the building, then the garments, and then so that's how the Yid is warned. In other words, the sign begins with the lesser, and then it goes more severe. And then he says that the confinement which a person afflicted with Taras must undergo has a positive purpose. Now, it says she moved him first from Levada. He must be isolated and be made known that he must remain alone. And as the pasuk says, Bodad Yeshiv Mechutz L'Machna Mishava, he shall dwell alone outside the camp where he lives. Now, what was the measure enacted for? It was enacted so that he would not be involved in Sichas HaRishoyim, in the talk of wicked man, which is characterized by L'tzanas V'Lashon Hara Makri. So the purpose of the punishment, what the Rebbe is trying to bring out there, is not just because Hashem has wrath and Hashem is angry at you, and Hashem does this to purify you. Exactly, like the Gemara. Yeah. Okay, Dala, this is what we're holding. Can be said that this is the reason why the Parsha is called Parshas Tazriya. Tazriya is the Haschalas Haleda von Chaim Chadashim. Canal Sif Aleph. What does Tazriya mean? Tazriya is the beginning of life. Al derech v'izriya by tfuas haperis. As darfun zol noch dem kum ranayet smicha. It's like the sowing the seeds of grain or fruit, which results in a new growth. So that's Tazriya. You're making whatever we're going to explain what Tazriya is, but that's the idea of Tazriya symbolizes and personifies the idea of new life. Azay der Teichen in Hanigoyim from Parshas Tazriya. This is also the blemishes in Parshas Tazriya. What it speaks about blemishes, side the nega atzma, side the hezger v'hechlet from the Metzera, was is moved on before the Vadai. So nit nor betur einish v'heder hatei for the Metzera hanau. Canal. Both the tzaras, the actual blemish itself, and the confinement and the affliction that a person has to go, that he has to be alone, isolated, and everyone has to know that he has to be alone. It's not a punishment that the person has to go through. Nor pratim unmitlin in dem tikin in dem heilung von der Metzera. But rather, it's like means and elements to correct him, to heal. As there's a line naseder from Chaim Chadashim and Tavin Kin Shaykhs and Sichas Arishoyim Shul Itzon Lashon Hara, that all these actions that he has to sit alone and everybody has to know he has to be alone. So this is basically enabling him to enter a new lifestyle in which he will have no connection with the talk of wicked, which we said is Litzonis and Lashon Hara.
It's growth.
Correct, it's growth, exactly. All right. It's like in modern English and modern America, we call this tough love. Is moving us from Parshas Negoyim is the hero if alle anshe ateda as a yonim is apulim yichedes from them ebersten zum sagen sein dem yidin soll gehen b'derech hayashim. Since Torah is lashon hero, so the Parsha of Mitzera teaches a lesson regarding all the punishments mandated by the Torah, that they serve a act to lead to improvement, causing him to follow derech hayashim. Farvos vertus ongivis. Now the question is, Farvos vertus ongivis in gezak davka by Mitzera. Okay, so you're telling me that Hashem, when He gives a punishment, He gives it in order to cleanse the person. It's growth. But why was tzaras singled out as an example to which to teach this hero? Hayes as eres choshev kameis begile is tumas Mitzera from the tumas achichamuris. Sein einish badod yeshev mechutz lamachlim meshava is from the einshim achichamurim. So since this person who has tzaras is considered like deceased, like he's dead, and it's also, you see that tumas Mitzera is from the most severe types of impurity. The punishment that he has to sit alone is also one of the most severe forms of punishment. Und von dem lernt man ab, euch benegeht der andere Einschim, als sie sein Naschala aufrat von dem Tikkun Adam. From this, we can derive that all other punishments are also beginning, and they're all for what? For Tikkun Adam, for like you said, growth, restoration, advancement. So just as the tzaras, the quarantine, the isolation, so this enables the person to be from a state of death to becoming a new entity. So why is teaching it in Tazriya? Why by Mitzera? Because Mitzera is like one of the most severe punishments. So we see that even Tazriya, that Mitzera, which is one of the most severe punishments, but it's not a punishment per se, but rather it's for growth, it's for advancement, restoration. And that's like kilo abinyan av to every other punishment that Hashem gives. Okay, now the Rebbe says in Hey, Shloimy, as from them kommt areis eichan afkaminin la'alacha, that based on what we explained, will come out a big nafkamina in halacha. Dem din by Metzera as kol yemi asher hanega by yitma chuli, badad yeshiv michutz lamachne meishavei. So this that the Torah says that throughout the time that he is afflicted by the blemish, he shall dwell alone outside the camp where he lives. So kemen magder zayin tzvei efanim. You can interpret this in two ways. As das is adin al derech v'be'andre tmeim zavim v'zavei su tmei mesim v'chatarin nit zayin b'teich machne shchina other machne levia. So you could learn it just like in regards to a zava, or anyone who came in contact with a tmei meis. So the halach is that they're forbidden to go into machne levia, machne shchina or machne levia. Depends what type of death it is. So at chomer yesu tumasi, because so al derech zeh, I'm sorry, skipped al derech zeh. Yeah, so it depends what. So that's what he says. So you can learn it in two ways. One way you can learn it that just like a zav and a zava can't, they have a certain level of tumah, so they can't go either in machne shchina or machne levia. Al derech zeh, therefore Metzera mitzad chomer yesu mitumase zich gefinnen mechutz lamachne oich mechutz lamachne Yisrael ubemela is badad yoshev. So you can learn it that a person who's afflicted by tzaras, because his impurity is more severe, so he has to distance himself from all three camps, even from the camp of Machne Yisrael, and therefore, he'll be forced to dwell alone. So basically, what comes out to the first way? The first way comes out that a person who's afflicted by tzaras is the same type of isolation that the other people have. But because his impurity is more chomer, more severe, so his isolation is also, it's one more level. But it's the same idea. A zav and zava goes here, he goes exactly, like you said, one more. So that's one way to learn it. Other, as the azara badad yeshu mechutz lamachne, is adin miyuchad by Metzera dafka, or that he shall dwell alone outside the camp, is a singular halacha applying specifically to a person who's afflicted by tzaras. So since this idea that he has to sit alone, it's solely associated with the Metzera, nit nur verbunden mit sein Tumah, nor euch mit inyanim yuchad meshuna von shar tumayim. So it results from the distinct personal circumstances, which are different from those of other individuals who have this tumah. So that's the first way to look at it. It's like one more step, but it's the same idea in zava, or same but harsher, or no, it's a total different din that the Torah says badad yesh michutz lamachne, and it's a special din that dafka Metzera. It's he has to sit outside the camp, but it's not connected with a tumah at all. It's a din miyuchad. Now, so the Rebbe says, and he's going to elaborate. The chayra is by Metzera that's tzvei bazunda the sugi dinim. It appears that there are two categories of the halachas that apply to a person afflicted by tzaras. Aleph, they're din klali from tmeim v'chashteit in Parshas Nosei. So you have the general halacha applying to all those who have tumah, like it says in Parshas Nosei, v'yishalchu v'namachne kol tzerua v'chol zov v'chol tamid l'nefesh. They shall send forth from the camp all those afflicted by tzaras, zavim, and all those who have contact with impurity. The tam is, why should all these people be sent away? Because tamu es machaneim. The reason is so they should not make the camp impure. So the machanois. So this measure was enacted for the sake of the purity of the camp. So the isolation of the person who has tzaras is not being demanded for the sake of the person to enable the person's purification, but rather it's for what? It's for the outcome of the tumah. But it's connected. In other words, why are we sending him out? Not for himself, but because we don't want the camps to be tummy. Like we don't care about the guy. We don't want him to hurt everybody else. Now that's one way. Or the tzivei badageish v'chus lamachne mishavei adin miyuchad by Metzera. Or the command, you shall dwell alone outside the camp where he lives, it's a unique halacha, applying specifically to the person afflicted with tzaras. So the purpose is not only to distance him from the camp because of his impurity, but rather for his personal sake to lead him to purification. So that's two ways to, by a Metzera, there's like two categories, two ways to look at it by tzaras. Either we're sending him away, not for him, but just not to hurt other people, or no, l'tarasi for him. Now, based on this, it's possible to say that there are several like nafkaminas from these two halachas. Aleph, by the din haklali v'shalchum in the machane is negei adi shlila. Erzol nit zayin in der machane, v'leitamas machaneim uvimela kishabato machane says they're demot nit b'machane. Now, there's halacha that they shall send forth from the camp. So the purpose is basically, what's the purpose? It's an exclusion. You're causing the person to leave the camp. Why? So that he should not make your camp impure. So now, when the halachas apply to the different camps of the Jewish people, now were nullified, and the halachas in regards to tumah are no longer practiced, any person who has tumah doesn't need to separate from the camp, because if the purpose is to separate from the camp, is in order that it should not be metam of the camps, so now that the camps are no longer there, you don't have to be worried about this. But if you look at it, that when that you were emphasizing responsibility, that he shall dwell alone outside the camp where he lives, as that he should be outside the camp. Now, if, however, for whatever reason, he does not dwell outside the camp where he lives, so even when the reason he does not do so is because there are no camps, he cannot attain purification. Nevertheless, it's still like incumbent upon him that he shall dwell outside the camp. So that's the first. If you look at it mitzad not mitam the machanes, so then there's no more machanes around. He's fine. But if you say that badad yeshem mechutz lamachane is an inyan of like responsibility incumbent upon the person that he has to be alone. So if for whatever reason there's no machane for him to separate from, it still has to come out.
He still can't get that.
Basically, yeah, he still cannot attain purification. Okay, Beis Sadim Din. Okay, we'll do. It's a little. I don't want to rush it, so we'll do Beis tomorrow, Mr. Shem.